Spousal maintenance is commonly referred to as alimony, or that's what most people know it as, but in Washington it's called spousal maintenance. What the court uses spousal maintenance for is if there's a longer-term marriage and a large discrepancy in income, the court uses that as a balancing factor. It's basically a payment to the spouse over a period of time in order to transition that spouse out of the marriage. In Washington, spousal maintenance is rehabilitative in nature. It's to give that person who has potentially less income a head start, a way to maybe get back in the workforce, maybe to get an education. Now, normally spousal maintenance isn't much of an issue on shorter term marriages. Anything under about 4 or 5 years, the parties simply haven't been together long enough where the court or the law is typically concerned about making that transition. Anything over about 4 or 5 years, and again with a large discrepancy in income, the court will use that as a balancing factor. In any longer term marriage, what the law says and what's the court's philosophy is to put both parties in a fair and equitable financial position leaving the marriage or transitioning for a period of years out of the marriage. So one way the court can do that is with a disproportionate split of the community property. So with community property, it doesn't always mean that everything's going to be divided exactly 50-50. The court may lean towards a disadvantaged spouse, a spouse that's making less money, and potentially they get 60% of the net estate as opposed to 50-50. How that relates to spousal maintenance is the court also uses spousal maintenance as a way to balance that, and those two concepts are generally linked a little. So for example, if someone were to do a 60-40 split of property and the disadvantaged financial spouse got a large portion of the property, it may start to minimize the risk for spousal maintenance. Conversely, if the parties were to settle or the court were to order more of a 50-50 split of the property, then it increases the risk for spousal maintenance. So in Washington, spousal maintenance is an extremely discretionary thing for the court. There's no calculation that you can use just to come up with a number because it's based on all kinds of issues, on education level, what one party should be able to do, earning potential versus what they may be doing currently. And so the court can consider all of these factors in deciding what's a fair number and for how long of a period of time. A lot of people ask, how is spousal maintenance calculated? And can I just plug in some numbers sort of like child support? And the answer is no. It's an extremely discretionary thing for the court. The court uses it to put the parties in a fair financial position leaving the marriage, and that can be dependent on a lot of factors. So for example, a spouse may not be working at that time, however they have multiple college degrees, they used to work, they have the potential to earn a certain amount of money. And so the court's going to consider that when determining how much spousal maintenance and for how long that spouse ought to get, as opposed to maybe someone from a marriage that hasn't worked ever in the marriage or doesn't have an education. The court's going to tend to be more generous with that number and with the length of time. Spousal maintenance questions and answers can be a very complex issue. The best way to get those details is give me a call, 206-448-1010.